Welcome to the Earth Your Wild podcast, brought to you by Reuserbox, providing a better way to buy cardboard boxes. We're your hosts, Jack and Ellie.
This is the podcast where we talk to industry experts and changemakers to try to answer the question, how do we make our businesses better for people and the planet?
Today we're chatting to Andrew Griffiths, co-founder at the Carbon Accounting Alliance and Director of Policy and Partnerships at PlanetMark. Andrew sits on the advisory boards and committees for the Institute of Directors, BSI Greenhouse Gas Management Standards, and government-backed initiatives including the UK Business Climate Hub and Project Perseus. He is also a TEDx speaker on the power of meaningful networking and delivers net zero governance training for the European Board Diploma. What an intro.
not an easy one to rattle off the tongue, unfortunately, these days.
No, yeah, you're very accomplished. Welcome to Earth Your Wild, Andrew. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. No, thanks for inviting me along.
And I wanted to start with, if you could tell us what's the story of how you ended up in sustainability and what eventually led you to PlanetMark and the Carbon Accounting Alliance.
So my background was actually psychology and healthcare.
Wow.
So I studied psychology at undergraduate. I wasn't kind of someone who went and did an environmental sciences degree or anything like that. And for me, sustainability was kind of an itch that I wasn't scratching for probably about 5 years. It was kind of something where I was always the person within the organizations that I was in who was passionate about sort of saying, right, we should be recycling more. We should be doing this. We should be doing that. And that was just a real, itch that I wasn't scratching enough. And so I started quite intentionally networking in the space. I went and studied, did a short course with CISL, Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, to kind of get some more academic formalized training in sustainability. And really my kind of transition into the world of sustainability was through the opportunity to bring my existing skill set into supporting a sustainability organization in the form of PlanetMark, where my first ever role at PlanetMark was Director of Digital and Community. So I was there to focus on digitization, community building. I kind of headed up essentially kind of 4 functions that are now completely separate departments within PlanetMark, because at that time PlanetMark was about 20 people, and now PlanetMark's around kind of 80, 90 people. So it's a very different beast now. And so my role then evolved with the organization. So I didn't come in as a sustainability expert or professional. I'd been studying it and learning it separately. But really, I've become most of my expertise has come through working directly within PlanetMark and how my role has then evolved over time. So where I'm now kind of policy director for PlanetMark. In terms of the Carbon Accounting Alliance, so PlanetMark are one of lots of, carbon measurement providers through tools and consultancy and things. And so PlanetMark is a sustainability certification for organizations and for real estate and construction projects. And kind of the Carbon Accounting Alliance emerged through me having a conversation with my co-founder, Emilian Hoet, who at the time was managing director for Climate Partner, who are another one of kind of the big players in providing of carbon accounting services and tools. And we were kind of having a conversation going, do you think it's kind of crazy that none of us talk to each other currently? Really? Like Emilia and I knew each other through the CISL course and we were friends. But we were like, is there a forum where, the Carbon Trust and PlanetMark and Normative and like these kind of big carbon footprint solutions, tools come together to talk about challenges facing the industry, opportunities, things that are relied upon, how we're going to advance best practices and engage with policymakers and standard setters and things like that. And the answer was a resounding no, nothing like that really exists yet. And we went, well, should there be? And we went, well, yeah, we probably should talk to each other, because we tell all of our customers to do that. We tell all of our customers, well, you must engage with your industry to solve the nitty-gritty challenges of whatever sector that you're in. Why are we not doing that? Why are we not walking the walk on that? And so we initially got together, we just literally put together a spreadsheet, listed out a bunch of names of people we knew in different firms, different places, said, let's just organize a meeting and have a chat about if we were to start coming together, what would we do? And so that first call happened about 3 years ago, more or less exactly. And it was 13 people, 13 organizations. And we came together and went, does everyone else also think that we should probably be talking to each other? And everyone's going, yeah, I've been thinking this. Like, why don't we talk to each other? And so it all kind of unfolded from there. And so we kind of did some little projects and things like that to kind of test out, okay, what could we do together? What would that look like? And then we also did a bunch of, sort of thinking around what it would look like in terms of a more formalized structure. And we announced the intention to have a community with, at that point, we had 37 founding organizations. And then it just ballooned. Word of mouth went absolutely insane. We've done almost no formal marketing. We've never spent any money on marketing at any point or stage. But we now are at the stage where we have about 2,300 individual members, over 1,300 organizations in around 70 countries who collectively manage carbon footprints for more than 200,000 organizations. And so and that includes both the service providers, but it does also include the in-house corporates, the academics, students, like a whole mixture of kind of people who are fundamentally the professionals with an interest in carbon footprinting and accounting.
So what is carbon accounting and why is it so important?
So the way I would kind of like to think about this is the best parallel for carbon accounting is financial accounting, right? And you imagine your CFO comes to you and they say, we want you to cut money from the budget. We want you to save some money. We need to reduce our costs. Now imagine that they came to you and then they said, but I don't want you to measure anything. I don't want you to set any targets. I don't want you to come up with a plan. I just want you to give me a list of initiatives that you think might reduce our costs. And then we'll give that to our investors and they're going to be really pleased with us. No, that's absolute nonsense. We'd be flying in the dark. Like the investors would laugh you out of the room if you tried to do that. Because fundamentally, you can't manage what you don't measure. You can't progress towards something you haven't set a target for. And if you haven't got a plan, it's probably not going to happen. And so carbon accounting really is kind of providing the tools to take action. Like we shouldn't be doing measurement for measurement's sake ever. We're not measuring something just to be scientists standing on the deck of the Titanic measuring how precise can we get this measurement of how far away that iceberg is. The only purpose of doing measurement if you're also telling someone to turn the wheel. So, should we steer away from this iceberg? We're not just here to measure as accurately as possible. That measurement is happening for a purpose. It's to improve the capability to make decisions, to take action, and ultimately to achieve reductions, to play our part as individuals and as organizations and as industries in tackling this very, very large challenge we face with climate change. And so without carbon accounting, we would be coming up with lists of decarbonizing activities, and we would have no idea what's working, how well is it working, what should we invest more in, what should we invest less in, what activities, what reduction initiatives should we scale up and span out and tell everyone this is working really well, everyone else should do this now. This is a collective challenge that we're in here. And so kind of another good metaphor is like if you're on a sinking boat and you've invented the whole patch repair kit, don't try and hoard that information, share it around, because you might make a lot of money whilst the boat is sinking, but you're still on a boat that's sinking. And it's actually in everyone's interest to propagate the solutions that are working, to propagate the best practices, and make sure that the initiatives and actions that people are taking to decarbonize actually are delivering the levels of decarbonisation that you're expecting.
And so with the Carbon Accounting Alliance, so what are the problems that you guys are trying to fix in the industry, and how are you fixing them?
So we have three key objectives. Always like to keep things simple. First is advancing best practices. Second is professionalizing the sector. And third is about creating a two-way interaction with policymakers and standard setters with the industry. So that first one on advancing best practices, at the moment there are lots of grey areas and there's a lot of interpretation that goes into how people do a carbon footprint. So we have the standards, you have the GHG protocol and ISO and these different standards that work well together. But there's always some choices to be made about how you interpret what you should measure in what circumstance. Fundamentally, a carbon footprint multiplies two numbers together. It's like you have a piece of activity. So I've used this many kilowatt hours of energy. And then you have a multiplier, which says 1 kilowatt hour of this type of energy equals this much carbon. And you multiply the two together. The interpretation is all in what form of activity, what form of data are you accepting as the measure of activity? And then the second is, which multiplier do I use? Because 1 kilowatt hour of energy is not always the same carbon footprint. It could be green, renewable energy. It could be coal energy. It could be gas powered energy. And those different things will come with a different carbon footprint. Now, some level of interpretation is inevitable in all forms of accounting. Even in financial accounting, you can take two sets of data to the two different tax accountants, and they can come back to you with different answers as to how much tax you owe. So there will always be some level of interpretation, but it is very much in our interest as an industry in terms of carbon accounting to align as much as possible to minimize the variance and make sure that best practices are being followed. Because if you have a situation where two different carbon accountants are being given the same set of raw data and coming back with wildly different results, then that's going to undermine the trust, credibility, and comparability of the work that everyone is doing. And fundamentally, as a sector, we should not be competing on methodology. We should be competing on delivery. We should be working to a common methodology and then competing about how efficiently we can deliver that, how quickly, how cheaply, and all those things. If we're competing on methodology, then we're undermining trust in ourselves, and that just is bonkers. It should be pre-competitive methodologically. So that's kind of the first one. Second one is around professionalization. So it's, should someone calculating the carbon footprint or doing an audit on the carbon footprint for Coca-Cola have some form of qualification to indicate that they are competent to do so? Probably, yeah. Like, we expect financial accountants to be qualified and professionally registered. Why would we not expect the same for our carbon accountants? And so that's a kind of a transition the industry now has to go through, because up until now, it's kind of been the Wild West, where everyone's learned through word of mouth, where it's been which company you happen to join, how did they like doing it, based on how that person read the standard and how they interpreted it. And quite often we hear all the time from kind of very experienced practitioners and carbon accountants that when they look back on carbon footprints that they did in the first 1 to 5 years of them working in the space, they're a little bit embarrassed, because there was a bunch of things that they were naive to, because they'd never had any formal training. They learned on the job, they figured it out as they were going. And there are some merits to that, but actually, if one of the ways of us advancing best practices and creating more common best practices is to make sure that everyone is trained to the same level of competency for delivering the services that they're delivering. So we've been working on a professional register for carbon accountants and auditors with ISEP, the Institute of Sustainability and Environmental Professionals, formerly IEMA. And that's up and rolling now. We've kind of had the first cohorts going through the Technical Associate Certificate in Carbon Accounting. We're in the process of finalising the assessment criteria for the practitioner level and principal level levels of recognition on the register, and kind of driving that through. And then that third objective around engaging the policymakers on a two-way street, that's really, it sort of ties in with both of the other ones as well, in terms of we can't advance best practices without that engagement with the policymakers and standard setters. And it's a much more efficient way of us engaging them. We found that the standard setters love it, actually. They love being able to come to our community and be able to have a one-to-many approach in kind of educating lots of professionals from across the sector, all in one place, without them needing to divide and conquer and come to us one at a time kind of thing. So it's a very kind of mutually beneficial kind of network and connection point with the policymakers and standard setters.
So why should businesses care about carbon accounting?
Well, I'll start with because it's the right thing to do, because this is something that does come through quite a bit. Like when we ask businesses, what do you think are the main benefits of taking action on net zero? Because it's the right thing to do does come up a lot, because as long as, I will take it as read that most listeners to this podcast probably believe that the climate crisis is a human caused thing that we should be taking some level of action on. And if I hope so, right? Assuming that is your kind of point of belief, then it is this thing of we're on a sinking ship. We're on a, fundamentally there is a big challenge ahead of us, and we all need to do our part to tackle this very large challenge that is systemic, planet-wide, species-wide, and affecting people now and going to affect people more and more and more and more in future. So do it because it's the right thing to do. Option number one, like the first big thing. Second is do it because it's going to be good for business. And this comes down to fundamentally businesses make money by solving problems. The bigger the problem is, the more people that it affects, and the more complex it is to solve, the greater the market opportunity as a general rule, right? You name a bigger potential problem than the risk posed to humanity by climate change. Like, it's one of the first really existential risks that we've faced as a species, but beyond kind of the risk and threat of nuclear war. It's the biggest self-imposed risk that we've placed on ourselves. And so any business in any sector that finds meaningful solutions to these problems is going to do very well. And those who are caught with their trousers down, i.e., they suddenly find themselves in a place where their products and services are no longer competitive because they're so much higher carbon than their competitors who have been taking action, will suddenly find that the tide turns around incredibly quickly. And that's that. I don't think a lot of businesses who have been a bit slower to the start line have realized how fast that will move. You know, how fast public opinion changes. You only have to look at markets like Australia, where the swing in public opinion around the time of the wildfires was incredibly dramatic, where all of a sudden almost everyone knew someone who had been affected by the wildfires, and almost the kind of overwhelming narrative then was like, oh, we need to do something about this climate change thing. Well, yeah. And if you haven't started already by that point, how long is it going to take you to get to where your customers and consumers expect you to be? You know, if you're trying to prove to them that you're taking it seriously and you're reducing your carbon footprint, and you've never measured a carbon footprint before, that's going to take you at least 18 to 24 months just to prove that you've made your first reduction. Because you're going to need to measure, do some stuff, and then measure again. Are your customers going to wait with you for 18 to 24 months, or are you going to start losing them to your competition faster than that because your competition already has the numbers to prove that they've been doing it? You know? So I think that kind of second thing is kind of the commercial interest and the marketing benefits and all of those sorts of things is a strong second reason. And then the third reason is managing risk. You know, increasingly financiers expect this, particularly for larger organizations. If you're not managing this risk, they will not loan you money. They will not insure you. They will not, your ability to access financing will start to be impacted quite significantly. And there will be carrots and sticks to that. And if you're not managing risk effectively as an organization, it's one of the main reasons that they will go down fastest. So those are the three things. Do it because it's the right thing to do. Do it because it's commercially in your interest to do so. And do it because you need to manage it as a key element of your risk management strategy.
With your second point, possibly particularly for smaller businesses, but I think possibly for all businesses, I don't know. Surely what's good for the planet is also going to save you money as well for a business. So we find that specifically. They go hand in hand. So it's really a no-brainer.
Yeah, in many, many instances, yeah. I mean, everyone who invested ahead in solar panels and stuff like that is laughing at this point. And EVs, yeah, like people going, oh, well, I'm really glad I did that. I'm now making money hand over fist. Like it's made my life so much easier. And these price shocks that are coming in on energy could have put me out of business if I hadn't invested in solar panels 5, 6, 7 years ago. So absolutely, I think there are lots of actions that organizations can take that are low-hanging fruit that will reduce your costs. You know, it's do you want to spend less money on energy? Yes. Do you want to spend less money on waste? Yes. Do you want to use some of your waste as a raw material for circular economy? Use it as a raw material so you don't need to buy as many raw materials. Yes, there are a whole bunch of things that are either cost saving or cost neutral as actions to be taken. Then there are things that currently would come at a cost. We have to face into that. Arguably, that's only because we're still not accounting for the damage being caused by certain products and industries properly, where a lot of the costs associated with those products is being externalized and put onto the consumer. You know, when you buy a car, the taxation on the car does not account for the health damages that pollution from cars has that leads to people using, publicly funded health services. It's not currently part. It's been that those costs are externalized onto society rather than being part of that product or that service. So you can argue that as soon as you account for all of the costs of products and services properly, it would flip the scales. And so that's why a lot of people are looking more at kind of how do we do internal carbon pricing and those sorts of things to kind of really factor in the costs of these things more effectively. And then it's also why you've got, various governments and people rolling out emissions trading schemes and carbon border adjustment mechanisms and things like that to try and, again, account for the wider impact of imported goods that is currently not being captured necessarily in the right way.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking, we got a commercial mortgage recently, just with a high street bank. And I don't know if it's legislation or whether it's just something they do, but we got a much cheaper rate on our borrowing because I think they wanted us to be EcoVadis accredited, but they had a lot of criteria around your environmental impact as a business. So it's HSBC. But they said it was a new thing, but I'm guessing that's some sort of legislation, like government.
Yeah, I think it's a demand. So I actually don't think there's elements of the government legislation driving it, but I think a lot more of it's coming from banks, and people are finding that there's very strong demand for green funds, for ESG friendly funds, where investors want to put their money into green backed things, pots of money that then will be loaned or given out to things that will help with decarbonization, help with social impact, help with all these different kind of spheres. And what is happening is that the requirements on the banks to evidence that the funding that they say is green funding is actually green, they are increasing. They're becoming much more stringent at kind of anti-greenwashing of finance, essentially saying, if you're going to call this a green fund, you've got to prove that it's actually driving decarbonization, that it's actually doing good, that it's actually being used for these purposes. And that's one of the reasons why Project Perseus is a UK government-backed initiative that is aiming to join the dots for particularly small businesses to be able to, in a scalable way, access green finance for ways that they want to decarbonize their offices and things. So for the bank to be able to call it green finance, they have to be able to prove that we gave this business 10 grand and they put in a heat pump, or they put some solar panels on their roof, and that led to this much of a reduction in their energy bills and their energy consumption, which led to this much decarbonization, which means that we can hand on heart say this was absolutely a loan that was helping decarbonize, helping be more sustainable. But for an SME to give them what the bank requires is assurable data, something that can be audited, right? That can be a lot of faff and hassle for an SME to gather auditable data on their energy, particularly if they don't have huge amounts of control over their energy bills and things like that, depending on what sort of building they're in. And so if that's the case, we need systems and processes, much like open banking does, with open carbon data, so that data can be shared, where what Perseus is, the first part of the Perseus program, is saying this data for energy already exists. It's already in the smart meters that people are using in their buildings. Why can't we simply pull that smart meter data straight from the smart meter, put it into a carbon accounting platform to calculate the carbon footprint, and then share that derivative data directly with the bank, so that the bank is able to go, this data is highly assurable because we can trace it all the way back to the specific smart meter that the data came from. It's automated through APIs, which means that there's no, or much less risk of human error or human manipulation of data or anything like that, because we can go, right, this carbon footprint came from these smart meters over here, and we can tell you exactly what timestamps we have against all of that and all of those sorts of things. It's assurable. Whereas if it's kind of someone going and doing meter readings, the chances of human error cropping up, silly little mistakes here and there, is much, much higher. We've seen that lots. Someone just puts the decimal points in the wrong place, and all of a sudden your carbon footprint looks completely different.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because obviously, we've had to do this ourselves as a business, try and work out how to measure our carbon footprint, and it's Ellie that's been heading that up. And as I understand it, it's been a real headache for you.
Yeah, it's a real headache. It's because we don't really have an automated system that can gather that information. It's just a case of it's like a big jigsaw puzzle once a year, I would say. And another very difficult thing is trying to get information from our suppliers, because they just kind of say, we don't have that information, sorry. Or, oh, we might have something for you, or we can, or they just, it's very difficult.
Another problem we have is, because we've been doing it for a few years now, us and other people are getting better at the data, even though we're still bad at it, which means our impact's probably looking worse than it was in some ways, but it's maybe a bit more accurate.
Yeah, I think it is getting more accurate, which is a good thing. Yeah, it's our footprint is definitely going up anyway, but it's also possibly addressing the inaccuracies.
There's addressing of inaccuracies, and then also for small businesses, there's the fact that you can be growing as a business, and so within Planet Mark certifications, we always report kind of absolute carbon footprint, but also an intensity metric where we say what's the carbon per employee or per £100,000 of turnover, because you have to have a way of, like, if a business doubles in size but the carbon footprint only goes up by 20%, they're becoming way more efficient. And this is one of the kind of the challenge. There's lots of challenges that the carbon accounting industry needs to be proactive in solving, because fundamentally, nature and planet Earth and physics does not give a crap about where emissions come from. It's actually quite a simple equation. We have a seesaw in which we are either emitting more or emitting less, and we are sequestering and removing more or removing less, with nature and things sucking carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. And that seesaw is currently so imbalanced that we can't physically plant enough trees and replant enough peatland and seagrass and all the other solutions. We can't do enough of that to counterbalance the level of emissions that we currently have. So we have to be achieving that. That's why we have to achieve a 90% plus reduction, with up to 10% being this kind of carbon capture kind of piece of how do we remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and store them for long periods of time. But that's the equation we're playing with. But that could be achieved, like example I often use, which is just made up numbers. But just imagine that Blockbuster, the way they delivered videos and films to be watched by you at home, just imagine that was twice the carbon footprint of Netflix in terms of their delivery model, where you've got physical stores, physical products, driving to and from the store to both get the DVD in the first place and then to return the DVD afterwards. Just imagine that it was double. In theory, Netflix, if you measured their carbon footprint between 2005 and 2010, Netflix would have utterly failed any net zero target. Completely failed, because they went from being like a £1 million business to like a multi-billion pound business in that time, right? Whereas Blockbuster would have achieved its net zero targets because it went out of business. They did a wonderful job at decarbonisation. But in principle, let's just say that Netflix's model of delivery was half the carbon footprint of Blockbuster, in theory, the emissions of the overall industry, and therefore the emissions it was contributing planetary-wide, could have halved. Now, it's more complicated than that, because people now watch way more films now than they ever would when it was Blockbuster, because you'd maybe get 2 or 3 DVDs out at a time, and then you'd watch that over the course of a week, and then you'd go and change them over. Whereas now some people are binge watching stuff for days at a time. So it's not perfectly relative, but you can sort of see the point where there has to come a point where the lower carbon delivery of products and services should become enough of a competitive advantage that one of the ways of decarbonising an industry is for the low carbon competitors to take more market share, right? And that by scaling up, like Planet Mark's carbon footprint is increasing in absolute terms, but it should be, because we should be doing more things for more people, which leads to our carbon footprint rising. But as a measure of intensity, we're getting more efficient. And as a measure of the impact of the services we're delivering, we're measuring more and more decarbonisation than ever. And it's a similar thing with like wind company, wind people building wind turbines and solar panels. We want them to increase their emissions because we need them to scale up and ramp up their production. We want them to become more efficient. We want it to be lower carbon per turbine delivered, per solar panel delivered. But ultimately, we want them emitting more, because they will displace other emissions from other parts of the energy sector. So it's a bit of a complex picture where it's never quite as straightforward as as we would like it to be necessarily. But ultimately, it's one where you've got to have many hands pulling in many directions from every industry, from every sector, from every profession.
Yeah, we've had the company that does our carbon footprint that helps us with it. They've said that to us. They've said, we want to see your business grow because we deal in used boxes so that we can help displace the new cardboard box industry. It's a similar kind of thing.
Who do you work with?
We work with Green Small Business.
Green Small Business, yes, they're in the Carbon Accounting Alliance.
But this like data problem, because I notice like with our business, it's just this data problem is just so bloody hard to get anything accurate. So we have like a reusable packaging business basically, and I've helped sign up probably 2,000 companies to our business, and I'm often dealing with a range of businesses, but usually like bigger corporates. And often what I find, 9 times out of 10, what I find is, especially in bigger businesses, you get like one or two people in this giant company, and they're given this role of like impact or sustainability, and they're just expected to work it out. And often these people are so confused, and they're like, I have no idea about anything. Like it just seems to be like a really big headache for people. How do we get the data? How do we? So what is the solution? Is that problem getting better, or is it the same?
I think the problem's becoming more painful. People are more painfully aware of it now because more people are asking the question than ever before. And so there's I'd say there are three elements to this challenge. The first is to realize that you're already having an impact simply by asking the question. Even if the answer is no, we don't have that data, you asking the question is influential, because if another customer and another customer and another customer and another customer asks the simple question, like without being demanding about it necessarily, not needing to issue ultimatums or anything like that, just asking the question. If 5 of their biggest customers ask the same question and go, do you have carbon data you can share with me? Funnily enough, they're gonna pull their finger out and start doing something if all of their customers are asking this question. So you're already doing the right thing there, and you'll be on a curve. But then the other element is that will lead to more data, better data over time, because gradually more and more people will be measuring, they'll be more equipped, they'll be more ready. But then a lot of it is out of your hands as a small business, especially. There needs to be standardization of how we measure and how we report and disclose. And there needs to be automation of data sharing for different purposes. So on the standardization of reporting, so we're working on with B4NZ and a coalition of others on a voluntary UK SME sustainability reporting standard. The idea being, if we can set out a standard for how an SME should be prepared to disclose carbon data, what's fair to ask an SME, what's not fair to ask an SME, and then have a standardized format, what we want to get to is the point where you produce your reporting once, and then you can disclose to everybody really easily, rather than it being like different customers asking you for things in different formats, different levels of like integrity, different levels of review, different measures, different formats, different everything. They should all be asking you for the data in the same way, so you don't have to do it over and over and over again in different formats. So that kind of standardization piece is key. And then this automation piece is on industry as well, where in principle, if you're working with green small business, say, right, let's say one of your big customers is a Planet Mark customer, right? Our customer should be able to ask you to submit data. And when that comes through to you, it goes, right, do you give permission for your data that already exists in the green small business platform to be automatically pulled into Planet Mark system for the purposes of supply chain reporting? And you just click a button and say, yeah, I give permission. And it just happens. Wouldn't that make a lot more sense? And so this automation of data sharing between carbon accounting tools and platforms is a big part of that puzzle for supply chain reporting, where in principle, the data, you kind of got in this ridiculous situation where the data that you need is already in a digital system here, and you just need part of that data to go over here. And at the moment, you're being put in a position where you're expected to kind of download from here, do a bunch of translation into the right format that it will meet the needs of what's over here, and then upload it over here. And it's a hugely time-consuming process, when actually it should just be get these two things to talk to each other.
It's true. And then you might have like 10 different people that you need to have different variations on that for, because you might need this for the bank and this for this supplier and this for this tender. And
but that should be automated away. It should be automated away. And then and that's true for the inputs into the system as well. We should be able to pull your energy consumption data straight from smart meters if you have them. If you have a travel management system that is managing your expenses and things like that for business travel, we should be able to pull automatically from that system. So a lot of the fundamental measurements increasingly become an exercise where you give permission once, or you kind of give, the same way as with open banking, you give permission every 90 days for that data to be pulled through, where you just give permission and it just happens. And you don't need to know how it happens, it just happens. We need to move more and more in that direction to reduce the administrative burden of measurement and reporting, and disclosure to make sure that as much time as possible, as much resource as possible, as much investment as possible is focused on the decarbonizing bit, the taking action bit, not on the I'm just measurement and reporting.
Yeah, definitely.
And how far away are we from that?
Genuinely not as far as I think most people. I think it's coming faster than most people realize. So like Perseus, we now have a sandbox environment where a bunch of platforms are getting ready to offer this automated pulling smart meter data in. Within a year, we will have gas data and probably water data factored into that as well. We've done a lot of the architecture of like dealing with the legal issues and the legal, like how does the permissions framework work? How does the trust framework work? Because if you're going to have this sort of data sharing, well, I think green small business, before they start linking up to an API that Planet Mark are linked up to, both of us need to have confidence in the data security of each other's platforms, right? And the data security of the connection between them. So you have to have this kind of layer of this. The hard bit is getting this layer of trust and permissions and legally kind of compliant frameworks and how it's going to work over time and in a standardized way. So it's not just that Planet Mark is building one API to green small business. It's that Planet Mark is building one API that links us to Carbon Trust, Normative, Climate Partner. Like, it links us to loads of systems all at once by doing it one way, one time, rather than needing to build bespoke things left, right, and center. So it's taken time to get here. We've been working on the Perseus thing, for example, for about 2 years. But once we get it running, it's relatively easy to bring in other types of data because we've already got the whole trust framework. So I think that's coming faster than many people realize. I think the supply chain data sharing automation could take another couple of years. But again, that will start the drivers for business to do that. We did a survey on software interoperability, and the whole sector, both users and service providers, are overwhelmingly in favor of there being a global kind of API standard for data sharing between carbon accounting platforms. Everyone says yes, this is a brilliant idea. It's the question of like how we bring people together, what's the governance of it, how do we make sure that it's done and delivered in the right way.
Interesting. Here's a question for you. So the Carbon Accounting Alliance has scaled incredibly fast by the sound of it. So is it like 3 years roughly since you've been going?
From sort of the day dot of us getting together for the first call, yes, but we only formalized as a non-profit entity in September last year.
Okay. So incredibly fast. You've got, is it more than 2,000 members? You're in more than 65 countries, more than 200,000 organizations getting their carbon footprint measured. What I want to know is that scale of progress, is that a sign that the industry was more broken than you initially realized?
I wouldn't say more broken. I would say a lot of people have been operating in silos, particularly internationally. And there is the opportunity now to reduce the amount of work that's being done in silos and to increase both the engagement in the development of best practice and then the popularizing and the spreading of that best practice once it's been agreed. So I think there's those two kind of arms there. And so I think that the organization the industry was incredibly siloed in terms of carbon accounting professionals often didn't know a huge number of other carbon accounting professionals. They would know a handful based on people they interacted with in their supply chain or different things along those lines. But the opportunity to really meet with fellow practitioners, fellow experts, and have deep technical conversations about like just asking what sometimes feels like a silly question. And there is no such thing as a silly question. You'll see in our community platform, there's most of it is people asking questions and getting answers from like 5 different people, some of whom will disagree with each other, which is healthy. But when we arrive at an answer that where kind of the majority of professionals have kind of gone, I think the best thing to do in that situation would be, great. That's a piece of best practice that can be captured and propagated so that the question doesn't need to be asked again. So that's kind of so I think it's been siloed. I don't think it was broken. I think you've got a lot of very well-meaning and very purposeful people who want to have a positive impact on the world. And they just needed a convening place to come together to have these kinds of conversations. Because we're not there to talk all the time. We're there to facilitate conversation.
Interesting. And your community platform, sorry, what is that? Is that just...
We use one called, it's a out-the-box platform called Mighty Networks that we use. That is all CAA branded and everything. but it's like our own social media site. Essentially, people can post, they can message, we list all of our events in there. We run our training through there. Our training programs are run through there. Our big conference, that's our conference platform as well for people to access the live streams and the recordings. So yeah, we've kind of got this one. When someone joins the Carbon Accounting Alliance as a member, that is where the majority of the engagement happens. We email people and bits and pieces like that as well, but the majority of it is you're in a community platform that allows you to find each other, talk to each other, ask questions of each other without us needing to get in the way. We're here to join the dots between people. We're not here to act as a. We're a bridge, but we're an open bridge where people can be talking to each other without us even knowing they're doing it.
Nice.
But that's a lot of the magic of it. That's where a lot of the kind of the collaborations spring up. There's so many collaborations that have sprung up from within the Carbon Accounting Alliance community, where people meet each other through an event or through one of our global gatherings that happens virtually every month, and then that leads to them going, oh, let's do business together, let's help, let's do this, let's work on that. And that's always my favorite things to see, is kind of seeing these impromptu collaborations emerging, not because we made it happen and I said, oh, you and you should collaborate, but they kind of met within this ecosystem that we created. And so that feels hugely rewarding and impactful.
Nice. Have you got any stories of any, collaborations that have made a real impact? Putting you on the spot now.
Collaborations that have made a real impact. So I think a lot of the stuff that we do to raise the profile of a whole bunch of different initiatives makes a big difference. Like things like Perseus, they've got a lot of the carbon accounting providers and platforms got involved in that initiative because the Carbon Accounting Alliance said, we're backing this, we think you should all get involved. So there's things where we kind of do things more proactively like that. But I'm a big fan of collaboration in general, like just kind of this kind of collaboration over competition piece is huge, and recognizing that one person's problem is usually another person's opportunity. In that, my favorite collaboration of all time, this isn't even a Carbon Accounting Alliance thing, but it's one of our Planet Mark members actually, is one of the kind of the football associations for county level football, Birmingham County Football Association. I've been working on a collaboration with the Birmingham County Police Force and Wolverhampton University, where the Football Association needs medals, tens of thousands of medals, because they do all of the kids' games, all the different leagues and everything. They load loads of metal medals, which up until more recently, they were obviously getting from China, because that's where you get bulk amounts of little plastic medals from. And they are basically trying to change that by the Birmingham Police Force have a problem. And that problem is that they are storing vast quantities of confiscated weapons in a highly secure secret facility, and they don't know what to do with it. They need to dispose of it well. And so they will pay to get rid of these things in a safe and secure way. Wolverhampton University have a forge. They have a forge that they train students how to do metal work. And they need projects to get their students doing things that could be commercially relevant and viable and all of those sorts of things. And so the deal is they form a community interest company together. The police force securely transfer the confiscated weapons to the university, who melt down these knives and melt down the stuff in a way that's kind of got the governance and it's all being done securely, melt them down, turn them into medals. Birmingham County Football Association agreed to buy all of the medals that they can make, which they reckon they could be making about 20,000 a year out of these confiscated things. And then on the back of the medal, it has a little thing that tells the story of where this metal came from.
Nice.
And then to cap it all off, the profits, and it gets it down to being about £1 per medal, because they don't have to pay for the raw material. It's kind of a training exercise that students are learning to do stuff through it. So it's kind of low cost in terms of the manufacturing kind of elements. And it's got one customer who's going to buy all of what they produce. And 100% of the profits that they generate doing that are going to be donated to knife crime charities in the area. It's just this full, you've got everything. You've got dealing with a social issue. You've got tackling the root of the problem through working with the knife crime charities and supporting them. You've got working with young people and students to train them in a useful skill that we need more of in this country. And then you've got the fact that then that's being used to reward kids for participating in sports.
Nice.
And reducing our reliance on importing these kinds of things from abroad, when actually we can have homegrown medals out of non-raw materials.
Brilliant. That's the coolest story I've ever heard of that one.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
I love it. It's one of my favorites. It's just got so much feel-good factor to it, right? I love it.
So it is possible. We just need more collaboration like that.
Yeah.
Across every sector.
Yeah, it's looking creatively at these sorts of things. Like I know, like British Sugar have been quite innovative in this space as well, where British Sugar recognise that they have, when they're processing sugar and sugar cane and different things into the molasses, it produces a lot of heat, a lot of CO2, and a lot of organic waste fertilizer. British Sugar, believe it or not, are getting into marijuana. So they are, because basically they can attach greenhouses to the side of the factory. It's heated by the industrial processes already happening. So it's just the waste heat is now being used to heat a greenhouse. The organic waste is fertilizer. That's all dealt with. And then the CO2, it means it's a CO2 enriched environment. So the plants grow faster.
Nice.
And they've done that. They started off doing it with organic tomatoes, and now they're doing it with medical grade cannabis.
Nice. Quite a jump from tomatoes to cannabis.
Well, you know, they do their market, but and like with the organic tomatoes, it was interesting because they sold that as locally sourced produce, organic produce, and rather they didn't need to do direct consumer, they did B2B, because they already had the connections and contacts with all of the local restaurants. So they said to the local restaurants, "Do you want locally sourced organic tomatoes?" And they were already their customers. So they turned all of their waste products into a resource, which made them more money.
It's amazing. I think it was one of these things, like they're like exciting things that people can get around. You know, it's nice to build some excitement in businesses in solving these problems, not just all doom and gloom and headaches.
Exactly. And I think, and you guys are doing this as well, right? With Reuser Box, because this is where kind of the relationship between policy and behavior kind of comes in so nicely. And I think sustainable packaging is a really good example, where you've got things like extended producer responsibility, EPR, that says there's going to be a cost associated with it every time that you introduce new non-recyclable packaging into the system. We're going to deal with the producers of this stuff, or those being imported, and that massively increases the incentive to reuse, recycle, and make things out of recyclable materials. Like it kind of goes hand in hand, hopefully driving the increase in growth in businesses like yours, whilst also solving a very real problem and improving the behaviours of people.
That brings me on to my next question.
Segue.
So you sit on the BSI Greenhouse Gas Management Standards Committee and government-backed task forces. How do you bridge the gap between what policymakers think businesses can do on net zero and what they're actually capable of?
It's a great question. How do I answer this succinctly? So I think the main thing is making sure that you're bringing practitioners into the discussion. That's a really big thing, right? And that's why, BSI and ISO are proactively trying to seek more practitioners, more experts to come and join these committees, get involved, because we can speak to them from practical experience about what are the challenges. With Planet Mark, we work with, over 700 organizations, many of whom are SMEs. And so we got very proactively involved in the creation of an SME sustainability data reporting standard for the UK. And a lot of what I was working on there, when I've been involved in the development of the ISO Net Zero standard, I can't say too much here, but in June, toward the end of June, the draft version of the ISO Net Zero standard will be published for public consultation. And there may or may not be an SME annex to the standard that specifically speaks to what is it reasonable for SMEs to do if they can't necessarily comply to the whole standard. Like if you can't do everything on here because it's quite a challenge, where should you start? And what's it reasonable for a large organization to ask an SME to do? So that's woven in as an SME annex. That's fundamentally in there because practitioners like myself were in the room going, guys, we need this to be a high bar for large organizations to have to really prove their mettle in what they're doing. But we need to acknowledge that SMEs won't be able to achieve some of this stuff. right? They're not going to be able to get that level of data. They're not going to be able to get the level of afford to do the levels of audit and other things like that might be required for large organizations. So let's have an annex that speaks to this, because it's needed, it's necessary, because SMEs are going to want to engage with this as well. So I think that's how you bridge the gap, is fundamentally by making sure that you have the right mix of stakeholders in the room, both in terms of users, in terms of expert practitioners who are delivering things in a one-to-many capacity, because often things that one business wouldn't think to complain about, someone like Planet Mark sees small irritations that are very common across lots of organizations. So, for example, the relationship between landlords and tenants when it comes to carbon data. If your landlord doesn't want to give you, as an SME, access to the energy data to be able to calculate your energy carbon footprint, often there's very little you can do about that, right? But that's just one small irritation, whereas we see that irritation magnified across dozens of organizations. We're able to turn to the government and go, this is a problem. We need there to be a legal requirement for landlords and tenants to share energy, water, and waste data with one another for the purposes of carbon footprinting. Otherwise, people's hands are tied. And we can advocate for that and point to, actually, in France, they have a couple of pieces of legislation that tackle this directly. And any building over 1,000 square meters in size legally has to put its energy consumption in the public domain on an annual basis. And so all of their tenants can, in the very least, get the total energy consumption of their building and figure out from that, well, we use this amount of square footage or this number of desks. We can figure out roughly what our carbon footprint probably is from that. Well, what's our share in this? But we don't currently, there's no kind of regulatory requirement quite like that in the UK.
Nice. It's interesting. I actually know a business that had that specific problem. So it's fairly common.
It is. No, it really is. And government does understand that. They are listening. So yeah, it's one where it's then defining how it could work. But that's why looking for examples where governments or industries have implemented things, ideally successfully, you then point to and go, just copy that. Don't reinvent the wheel. Just do that.
The Carbon Accounting Alliance is launching its first accredited carbon accounting training. Is the lack of professional qualifications in this space one of the most underrated problems in the fight against climate change?
Yes, I do think so. Partly because it's what people being trained and learning in the same way, in a way that is being assessed against a competency framework that has been agreed by industry for industry, is the best way of ensuring that people don't have gaps in their knowledge that they simply don't realize are there. So a lot of what we've learned from the first cohorts who have been going through our technical associate certificate in carbon accounting is a lot of the feedback has been, I knew quite a lot of the organizational corporate carbon footprinting, but I had never done product or project carbon footprinting. And I also had never had the basis of kind of the theoretical underpinnings of carbon accounting and how it relates to financial accounting and governance of organizations. Often people have jumped straight into, right, I've got to calculate a carbon footprint for this organization. I'm just going to figure that out in a very domain specific. I'm just going to go and hunting for the data I need to do that. And then I'm going to figure it out as I go. Whereas getting this kind of solid grounding in understanding, why do we do things the way that we do them? What's the context within which we're doing them? And how does this relate to the wider governance of the organization? And how does a product carbon footprint feed into an organizational footprint? And those sorts of kind of things. You have to have that solid foundation. And I think as the industry gets used to this, one of the things that's going to be quite remarkable is we're going to find that there will be lots of long-standing practitioners who've been doing this for 5, 10, 15 years who may not have had training in some. There'll be domain specialists with huge expertise in certain things, and they will have some really silly gaps where they've never had a reason to go and understand or learn this thing, and they don't therefore understand the relationship between the thing that they know really, 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 really well and this thing that they don't know very well. So I think that's a big piece of the puzzle. The second piece of the puzzle is it's about safety nets, right? So a lot of people kind of look to, okay, so it's a Planet Mark certified carbon footprint. Amazing, because Planet Mark have a good, strong reputation. Therefore, we feel we can trust this. You have multiple safety nets in that there's the name of the accountancy firm, and the accountancy firm, if they are caught doing things badly, they can lose their right to practice. But that's at an organizational level. But also at the individual level, if you are caught operating poorly, then you can lose your professional registration. You can lose your license as an individual to operate. So there are consequences for bad practice and there are incentives for good practice, whereby I'm on the professional register, I'm recognized, I've demonstrated like I know something to this level, to this quality, to this extent. And we could start to have much more clear professional pathways for people. So like at the moment, we don't know what's the average salary for a junior carbon accountant, kind of a mid-tier carbon accountant, and a senior carbon accountant. I don't know. But there should be a difference between those things. At the moment, there's no benchmark and there's no real way of determining what's the difference between particularly a decent carbon accountant and a very good carbon accountant. Currently, there's not really there hasn't been a framework to tell the difference between the two. Now there is, with the competency framework we've developed. It shows very clearly these are the things that you should know before you can be called a principal level carbon accountant. This is fundamentally about the credibility of both the individual and the organization delivering a carbon footprint. We need there to be benefits for someone where there's a demonstrative proof that they don't have gaps in their knowledge and their understanding and their competence. That's why we've developed this professional register, because then when you choose to use a particular carbon accounting firm, they should be able to show you, well, the person who signed off on your carbon footprint is qualified to do so. They know what they're talking about.
I was wondering, this analogy between financial accounting and carbon accounting, obviously it's like everyone talks about this. So do you think it should just be weaved into financial accounting? Like, should it just be every accountant? Should the government just not change the system where it's like, you do your financial accounting, this should just be part of it?
I think it's increasingly going that way. And there are certainly those who would, say very clearly, like so some very prominent Carbon Accounting Alliance members like Sage and Zero and others. Obviously, that's what they kind of think, is that we should be equipping financial accountants to deliver carbon accounting in addition as well. And I think that is definitely part of what needs to happen. Will a financial accountant have the level of the depth of knowledge and understanding to be able to go and do a product lifecycle assessment? Probably not. It's a different kettle of fish, and they can go and learn that, but it's a very different, much more consultative style of delivering a service or a product to a customer than a financial accountant would necessarily be used to. So I think they can be very complementary. I think that there's a certain amount of things that very naturally could be done by financial accountants with the right training, with the right credentials. And we certainly see a lot of that. There's a lot of Carbon Accounting Alliance members who are financial accountancies who are adding carbon accounting as a string to their bow. But I do also think that there is a very clear role for specialists, who are the people that you turn to when you're not sure what best practice is.
Makes sense. Was there anything in particular you wanted to bring up or talk about or address?
I think this is one of the first big intractable problems we've had to deal with as a species, other than the ozone was the first big example of something where it was a global problem, and the Montreal Protocol and Montreal Agreement did solve that. It addressed it. Like, we've done this before. We had a big problem with refrigerants and aerosols demolishing the thin protective layer that protects us from solar radiation and things like that, causing a big headache for us as a species. We came together, we solved it. Right now, we have arguably the climate crisis is a much harder problem. It's being caused by a wider range of human activity and a wider range of things. It's going to be a big challenge for us. It's going to be something which is going to take collaboration among all different industries, all different professions, all kind of pulling in the same direction to solve and to address in the meaningful ways. So I'm personally very hopeful for that, because I think human ingenuity comes to its best when we kind of find ourselves trapped in a corner. The question is, how quickly do we do it, and how much suffering do we allow to happen in the meantime? Because it is a problem which has a lag to it. And so the longer we take action, even if we were to solve the problem tomorrow, if we just stopped emitting anything tomorrow, no more emissions going into the atmosphere, the effect would continue to grow for at least the next 20, 30 years, even if we did nothing else. So it's not linear. in terms of the impact and the effect that it has on us. And so it's kind of it's a human evolution point as a species, right? We've got to go to the point where we can come together as a species on a big global problem that affects all of us in different ways, but affects all of us. And yeah, collaborate.
So it's 10 years from now. What does the world look like, and what role has the Carbon Accounting Alliance played in getting us there?
My favorite word in the English language, although it's an old English word, is coddywomple. Coddywomple. We coddywompling. And the reason for that, so coddywomple means to travel in a purposeful manner towards a vague destination. And I think a lot of what we're doing with sustainability and climate action is coddywompling. I couldn't tell you exactly what a net zero society is going to look like in 2050. I don't know exactly what that looks like. I couldn't describe it in great levels of detail. I know it includes more renewable energy. I know it includes less consumption. I know it includes kind of more efficient use of resources and reuse of materials and reducing waste. And I know lots of things that I know it's in that direction. I know which way we need to travel, but I don't know what the end destination looks like exactly. And that's, a lot of what we got to do here is trust in kind of keep putting one foot in front of the other and go, I know exactly where we're going to end up, but it's that way. And making that journey together one step at a time as fast as we possibly can. And so, yeah, we all go coddywompling together.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. We hope it was truly worth your while. For more information, visit reuserbox.co.uk/worth-your-while.
And if you'd like to appear on the next series of Earth Your While, please email media@reuserbox.co.uk.